Hello and welcome back to another installment of my fashion history series. Today we'll be looking into the life and designs of the King of Cling, Azzedine Alaia. Per usual, I'm going to break this video down into Azzedine's life and story, and then we will dive into some of his more important moments throughout his career. Unfortunately, unlike in some of my other fashion history videos, I do not own anything from Alaia, but I did want to make this video kind of as a counterpart to the Mugler video I made a little while ago, and also because I just watched Clueless. Anyway, let's dive in. Azzedine was born in Tunis, Tunisia on February 26th in 1935, I think. He was born with a twin sister and a younger brother, and his parents worked a wheat farm outside the city. The midwife that helped deliver his entire family introduced him at a young age to art with books, including one about Picasso and art exhibition pamphlets. Against his father's will, she helped enroll him in the School of Fine Arts in Tunis as a sculptor, and some sources claim that she lied about his age to get him in early. Through this school, he got his first glimpse at understanding the human body and form. His sister was always handy with sewing and helped teach him the basics through a notebook, and he began to work at a local dress shop to help with finishing. Here, he had his first real experience with fashion and learned about many techniques and fabrics. A great domino effect of connections helped land Azzedine in Paris. According to an interview he gave to fashion magazine The Ground in 2011, when he was working at the dress shop, two wealthy women who often spent time overlooking the shop from their balcony asked him about his work and invited him to their house. He then met a cousin of one of those girls who loved the fresh European designs of Dior and Balmain. Through this, he found a job with a dressmaker making copies of those designers. Later, a very well-connected friend of the cousins heard about his skills and secured him a job working at Christian Dior in Paris in 1957 at the young age of 22, just as Yves Saint Laurent began at the helm after the untimely death of the brand's namesake. Unfortunately, his time at Dior only lasted 5 days, but he quickly began finding his footing in Paris. He found a job as an au pair with a wealthy family and sewed for the women and friends of the family. Later, one of those friends offered him another spot in her home with much more time to make clothing. Azzedine continued to grow his space, and he took in a few more wealthy, older, private clients until he could afford his own apartment in the city. In Paris, he also worked under Guy Laroche and then Thierry Mugler for a few years each. The latter, along with Claude Montana, eventually were regarded with Azzedine as the most important French clothing designers of the 1980s. A workaholic, he literally made clothes all hours when he wasn't eating or sleeping. His clients, while diverse intellectually and culturally, were almost always older. Because of this, his clothing was a well-kept secret until he was introduced to the editors of French Elle. His clothing was then after showcased in their magazine, and he soon became displeased about the age of his current customers. He said, "I don't want to dress them anymore." Fashion had slipped away from them. It was being made by younger people in the street. In 1979, he opened his maison and privately curated his first ready-to-wear collection in 1980. His erotic and ergonomic leather collection was well received by influential fashion editors and set the groundwork for the chic 80s silhouette before people even knew what it was. Azzedine's business grew enough for him to move to the wealthy Marais district of Paris. Discreetly, he built up a network of clients to publicize his pieces in the streets. A famous story went that the interior designer André Putman, who was known for bridging fashion and interior design for the likes of Alaia and Karl Lagerfeld, was wearing an Alaia leather coat in New York when a Bergdorf Goodman buyer stopped her and asked what designer she was wearing. In 1982, Don Mello, then the president of Bergdorf, saw a small assortment of Azzedine's pieces and requested that he create a full collection specifically for the department store. Alaia, known to be the most perfect of all perfectionists, finished, fitted, and pressed the clothes himself until the last minutes before the show in the store itself. Thankfully, Dawn Mello, the same woman who over a decade later would bring Tom Ford to Gucci, was right in her instincts, and the Alaia collection broke records for sales of a new designer at the retailer. By 1985, he held his first public show in New York to an audience of 1,500 thrilled ticket holders out of a record 10,000 requests. This turnout was a huge surprise for someone almost exclusively known in the insider fashion circles of the day. The show itself was daring and on a grand scale, but most of his shows weren't like this. Alaia was known for his low-key shows on his own schedule. He infamously didn't follow the Fashion Week schedules of other designers and often strayed away from the spectacle shows, unlike many of his counterparts. The grandiose Mugler shows of the 80s and 90s were the complete opposite to the sedate salon showings of Azzedine Alaia. Alaia's lack of spectacle was a reflection of his feelings on fashion. He wanted everything to be about the clothes, and he wanted the clothes to be about the body. He once said in a translated interview for the Washington Post, "I put the female form on a high level. I wanted to embellish a woman's figure, to bring out the best. I like to see the woman like a goddess." His figure-hugging dresses brought a formerly lacking sense of youth to designer's customers. To his delight, his new clientele included the likes of Tina Turner, Paloma Picasso, Princess Caroline of Monaco, and Grace Jones, the last of whom carried him on stage when he won Best Collection of the Year at the Oscars de la Mode for the French Ministry of Culture. As Azzedine continued to grow his company, he began finding his own signature style. He was a master tailor and seamstress, creating perfection with every cut. He loved a voluptuous silhouette with broad shoulders and peplum skirts, often in simpler, cooler earth tones and neutrals. Most of all, though, he was a lover of the human form, and created clothes to showcase it. He became known as the King of Cling for his figure-hugging dresses that were always perfectly cut for the woman wearing them. This didn't come without criticism, though. Many saying that he was taking advantage of the male gaze and constricting women in an era when they were gaining continuous freedoms socially, economically, and politically. Critics would call his dresses and tailoring vulgar, to which Alaia responded in an article with the Washington Post, "It is possible to look vulgar in loose clothes, and it is possible to go out in a brassiere and shorts and not be vulgar. Vulgarity depends on the woman, not the clothes." He often made these dresses out of a proprietary jersey fabric that he invented in order to create the desired clinging effect. And Alaia really was an inventor. He was known to collect dresses and other garments from couturiers like Cristobal Balenciaga and Charles James, just to take them apart to understand and learn about their complex construction and then put them back together. His never-ending desire for learning led Alaia to be the trendsetter. He created new technical fabrics, was the first to stud clothes with metal, and essentially created the idea of the supermodel. When she was only 16, a young Naomi Campbell had her money stolen on her first day in Paris. Not knowing where to go, a friend brought her to Azzedine's apartment in Marais for dinner, and he took care of her. They stayed together for a while without being able to communicate with one another in the same language. Despite this, they got along incredibly well, and Naomi decided to stay with Alaia a little longer. In 1998, he told Independent magazine, "In the beginning, Naomi just slept on a mattress, but she would escape through the window to go out clubbing with the other girls. So, I put her in the room above mine to keep an eye on her." Throughout the years, Azzedine continued to be a father figure to the up-and-coming supermodel and guided her through the wild highs and lows of the fashion industry. Beyond Naomi, though, starting in the 80s, Azzedine's form-fitting dresses helped create the concept of a supermodel. Linda Evangelista, Christy Turlington, Veronica Webb, Naomi Campbell, and Stephanie Seymour were all regulars of his shows and held close personal relationships with him. His intimate friendships with many of these girls allowed him to get them to break other contracted gigs to come model for him while he paid them in clothes. As the dressmaker who could highlight a body like no other, these supermodels were the best advertisement Alaia could ever hope for. After years of dominating the fashion scene and amassing critical acclaim, Alaia and his clothing began ceding to the times in the 90s. A recession and rapidly changing tastes made couture fall out of popularity, and grungy minimalistic aesthetics no longer suited Alaia's brand. Furthermore, Azzedine's sister Hafida, whom he was intensely close with, passed away in 1992 from complications with breast cancer. He said at the time, "I was working so hard I didn't have enough time to see her at the hospital. Afterwards, I learned that work shouldn't come first. It's why the fashion calendar bothers me. Editors have no time for their families. I don't care about losing my house, I cared about losing my sister. It's stupid to be so crazy about clothes." By 2000, Alaia was back to making clothes and staging shows, helped by the effort of his friend Carlos Azzani. He sold a 100% stake of his company to Prada that year and made sure they preserved his personal archives and vintage couture collection. Prada, a booming company by then, renovated and transformed the company while maintaining its design ethos and aura. By 2007, Alaia had financially recovered enough to completely buy back his company and then sell it to the luxury conglomerate Richemont as he continued designing and keeping his head down, forever hard at work. He continued staging private shows and fittings for years, maintaining his distaste for the fashion schedule and keeping his form of discreet luxury. Sadly, on November 18, 2017, Alaia passed away in Paris at the age of 82. His passing reverberated around the fashion world as people from all over came together to celebrate the life of a visionary. In February of 2021, Peter Moulier was announced as the new creative director of Alaia, and he presented their first show since the founder's passing in July. Moulier was previously Raf Simons' right-hand man throughout his own brand in his tenures at Dior, Jill Sander, and Calvin Klein. He wrote a letter to Azzedine Alaia for the show notes under each seat at his first collection, and is reaching into the Alaia archives to preserve the legacy of the iconic and timeless designer. As a social and fashion recluse for most of his career, it is quite difficult to pull together a list of Alaia's most famous works, collections, or moments, but I'd like to briefly discuss just a couple of them that keep his heritage alive. In the 1985 Roger Moore Bond film A View to Kill, Alaia was tasked with costume design for the avant-garde Bond girl Mayday, played by the ever-iconic Grace Jones. Thankfully, this Bond girl defies most of the classic damsel in distress tropes and oozes confidence, coolness, and strength. This character was in need of a wardrobe to match, as she performed stunts at nearly the same rate as the protagonist himself. Azzedine Alaia was brought in because Grace Jones was already his muse, and his tendency towards futuristic clinging fabrics was perfect for the job. Alongside costume designer Emma Porteous, Alaia designed phenomenal bodysuits, capes, and leather jackets for Mayday to jump off the Eiffel Tower, train horses, lift men, and then seduce them. Grace Jones' role in the film was a bright spot in a fairly middling Bond film, and helped Alaia remove some of those critics' negative remarks on his designs previously perceived as constraining and negatively sexual. Lastly, let's talk about the most iconic fashion name drop in movie history. We all know Alaia as, like, a totally important designer, as Cher states in the middle of an armed robbery in the 1995 film Clueless. The costume designer for Clueless, Mona May, had some kind words to say about Azzedine near the 20th anniversary of the film a few years ago. To get an Alaia dress, I had to make so many calls. There was really no club promoting at the time. There was none of what's happening now. It's really all my footwork trying to bring these designers in. And my budget wasn't huge, so we used whatever I could for free, and Alaia was very generous with the pieces. He was such a collaborative designer. Clueless is now looked back on as a hallmark fashion movie that helped bring high fashion into the minds of many, after influencing a wide range from Karl Lagerfeld to Charli XCX. Thankfully, there was no bigger name in that entire movie, at least in my opinion, than Alaia. That about wraps up everything I can say about the brilliant designer in my short time here. I wanted to finish on a quote that brings Alaia's story back to the beginning in a beautiful circular fashion. Between September 2013 and January 2014, the City of Paris Museum of Fashion curated a retrospective exhibit of Azzedine Alaia's archival work. Christina Catherine Martinez deftly wrote for Artforum that 4 decades of Alaia's work reveals no defining trends, only an increasing interest in the refinement of technique, a kind of reverse neoclassicist ethos that lends soft flesh and airy fabric the smooth, uncanny weightness of sculpture. That same sculpture that Alaia studied as a young man as he got his first glimpse of what would become his lifelong passion, appreciation of the form of the human body. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye.